Welcome to Newsmax Now. For those of you celebrating Holy Week, happy Good Friday. And to those of you who are honoring Passover, a very happy Passover to you and your family. Well, the president and Congress may have left Washington for vacation, but the news is still churning, and we have a lot to talk about today. We dive into the growing tensions between the U.S. and Russia. Is there another Cold War brewing? It was a quieter week in the nation's capital, relatively. Our Newsmax correspondent, John Gizzi, gives us the latest from the White House shakeups. And is California going too far with regulations? Wait until you see what they're up to now. But we begin with the latest on the FISA investigation and Jeff Sessions' decision not to appoint a second special counsel to probe alleged abuse by the top intelligence agencies. Of course, I want to remind you that we want you to weigh in on this and all of our stories as well. The phone lines are open and we're taking your calls. The number is 877-NEWSMAX. That's 877-639-7629. You can also comment on our Facebook and Twitter pages or at newsmax.com. Joining us for the entire hour today are columnist and author Alice Hennigan and TV host and author Michael Malice. It's great to have you both here.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. So, as we mentioned at the top of the show, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions did not appoint a special counsel to investigate Republican complaints in the FBI and DOJ, but he did announce a special prosecutor, that is, to probe potential FISA abuses and the alleged mishandling of investigations into Hillary Clinton's Uranium One deal. So, tossing it over to both of you, do you think that this is a good idea?
Oh, I think it's a great idea for political reasons. First of all, the Republican base is kind of frustrated that there's all this work being done investigating President Trump when there's so many things on the table that are questionable at best about Hillary Clinton and her dealings. As we saw recently, the cost of her getting paid for speeches has dropped by 85%. This is not simply a function of her losing the election. This was in many ways, from people's perspective, that she was effectively taking bribes on the table in order to do a quid pro quo. So there's a lot there to uncover, and I think it would be great for the Republicans to kind of see what kind of comes out, because she's all about secrecy. So there's things there that even might not be illegal, but would certainly be embarrassing, humiliating, and she's the best gift the Republican Party has at this moment.
An interesting perspective. Ellis, your take.
I mean, she's yesterday's news, right? I mean, she's not in government. She doesn't have any power anymore. She's
still making headlines.
Person. Oh, well, so are you and I, but I mean, no special counsel.
Not me, brother.
No special counsel. Listen, it pains me, as you can imagine, to praise Jeff Sessions.
Yes,
right?
I would imagine
I've
so.
spent a
That's why we have
lifetime
you here.
not praising Jeff Sessions.
Right.
But I got to tell you, this seems to me to be a pretty reasonable middle ground. He's got the United States Attorney in Utah, a bipartisan guy by all accounts, looking into this thing. It's fine to look into it, but it has now been investigated about 417,000 times. Nobody has found any kind of chargeable criminality here. People who hate Hillary are going to hate her. People who still defend her are going to still defend her. And you know what? She is yesterday's news. Trump is the president. Let's focus on what's going on right now.
Yeah, well, let's hear what some GOP senators had to say to this in response. Senators Trey Gowdy and Rob Goodlatte issued a statement still calling for a special counsel, but they said that Sessions' move was, quote, a step in the right direction. But GOP Congressman Mark Meadows was a bit more critical of Sessions. He tweeted, "So the Obama DOJ can open a legally questionable investigation into the Trump campaign, allegedly based on a campaign volunteer mouthing off at a London bar. But this DOJ can't appoint a second special counsel after all the troubling documents we've seen? Disappointing." So there's obviously division even within the Republican Party about this. And my question is, Michael, you said it's a good idea politically. Going into the midterms in the 2018 election, are people losing track, especially the GOP base, losing track of all of these special investigations?
Sure, because it's the same thing every day. But I'm going to disagree with Ellis on one minor point. What would be very useful, yes, maybe Hillary's yesterday's news, but this would be a very good tactic for the Republican Party to go after the press. Going after the press has helped get President Trump get elected. We remember during the campaign he even joked about killing members of the press to huge applause from his audience.
Let's not do that, though. Just so we all know.
I mean, that's just one campaign promise he's broken, just like the wall.
As we sit here on the news, let's not.
But the point is, the more the press looks like they're carrying water for Hillary Clinton, the more the base gets riled up and the more they'll go out and vote.
Yeah, Ellis, I mean, GOP divided here. What does it say about Washington? As you've seen some of the shakeups happening and some of the administration members leave, and they've talked about how toxic the culture in Washington is. Is this just contributing to more of that?
Well, yeah, but as does pretty much everything. The problem with the Republicans these days is they don't really know what they stand for, right? I mean, for years we've heard that the Republicans were hawkish on defense and real concerned about deficits, right? It turns out, and very, very, very worried about character counts. Anyone with any kind of sexual immorality, we can't go anywhere near that sort of person.
Or perjury.
I've heard all of that my whole life, and it turns out they didn't believe any of that stuff. So I think that there are real Republicans, there are people who just want to win with Trump, there are people who are pandering to the base, and I think it's pretty hard to push all that into one party.
I'm just going to make one more point. Ellis is right with much of what he said, but after Hillary Clinton's surprising loss in 2016, the question was who are going to be the new leaders of the Democratic Party, and it turns out it's going to be a porn star and a bunch of traumatized high school children.
Right, well, we're actually going to talk a little bit about who might be in charge at the Democratic Party a little bit later, but we want to actually bring in our White House correspondent, John Gizzi, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. Of course, car manufacturers are set to receive a gift from an unusual source. This is a new story. The Environmental Protection Agency. Bet you're surprised to hear that. Agency head Scott Pruitt has sent the White House a draft of a plan to lower fuel efficiency standards and eliminate what they consider to be regulatory burden, resulting in more affordable vehicles. Cars pollute. This is a fact. Is this a regulation that needs to go to make them more affordable again? John, we'll start with you.
Yes, I think it certainly is, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. When Scott Pruitt assumed the helm at EPA, he said he would be neither a shill for business nor part of the extreme green movement, but he would be very much in the middle and fair. And I think certainly this ruling from his office is down the middle and fair, but it will help the industry to a great extent. And also, it's been something that's been environmentally checked out already by his department. There'll be a lot of criticism of it, but I think he's gone down the middle, which is what he said he would do.
Very interesting. Of course, former President Obama made regulatory efforts to fight greenhouse gases a central focus of his second term in office. Those efforts were criticized by many Republicans who characterized the EPA's environmental regulations as government overreach or going too far. The country obviously voted in President Trump, who was all about repealing regulations. However, Michael, I'd like to ask you, are people used to this by now, used to the fuel standards, used to looking for fuel efficiency in their vehicles to the point where this is... Why are we going back to this again?
Well, I'm from Brooklyn. I don't have a driver's license, so you might be talking to the exact wrong person. However, I think the Americans have a very mixed relationship with the EPA. On the one hand, they do regard it as an example of government overreach and too many regulations that we have to save the snail darter. On the other hand, I think there's a huge consensus among political parties and stances that the environment is really a nonpartisan issue, and that's something that we should all be concerned about. So I think it's really hard to move on this issue one way or another, because at the base, people are like, we don't know what the science is, but we'd rather err on the side of caution than on the side of pollution.
Yeah, Ellis, your thoughts?
Yeah, boy, if Scott Pruitt is right down the middle, Grizzy, I wonder who's an extremist. I mean, this guy is way, way out there. Yeah. And this, by the way, this notion that we ought to have good gas mileage in cars because it'll pollute less, this is not a partisan issue. I mean, you're absolutely right about it. Richard Nixon was the one who brought it in. Every single president since has been a supporter of the idea of continuing to improve, to do better on this, to have cars that get us more and better gas mileage. Mike, talk about a U-turn. This is a big one.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean...
but remember something.
Kizzy, go ahead.
It is not a big U-turn in the sense that for years, what began as an advisory body has become in itself an enforcement mechanism for this. And to the point that 20 years ago, at least, they used to advertise for their green police to enforce regulations. I recall in 1995 when the House almost stripped EPA of all of its punitive enforcement mechanism. The idea of an environmental protection agency in a clean environment was a good one, but it's evolved into something that neither Nixon nor William Ruckelshaus, the first director, ever imagined when it was created in 1970.
Right, very, very interesting. Thank you for that historical outlook. We're going to switch topics here, and John, want to go to you on this. Yesterday was Communications Director Hope Hicks, her last day in the White House. She was one of the president's most trusted aides. Now that the day is here, how big of a blow is her departure, and who can he bring in with a similar relationship, if anyone at all?
Well, the Director of Communications has historically been someone who crafts the administration's message. Now, looking on this in terms of merit, Hope Hicks considerably fell short of the traditional portfolio of the Director of Communications. It doesn't matter how close she was to the president or had his confidence. It's what she was producing in that position. I might add, a lot of distinguished people have held the Director of Communications portfolio over the years, George Stephanopoulos to Pat Buchanan. I don't think she measured up to them, to be honest. He will probably have to go to the outside, to television, public relations, or the campaign world, to come up with a Director of Communications who can sculpt a message for the administration and an agenda that will say to people, this guy is going places.
Right. Okay. Last question. You've got about 30 seconds. Former Attorney General Eric Holder under President Obama was asked this week if he might run for president in 2020. The rumors have been swirling. You have spoken to him. He didn't say yes, but you let us know what he did say and what your thoughts are about this.
Okay. He didn't say yes, but he said he would certainly look at it. Right now, General Holder is totally absorbed in a project to elect more state legislators who would end the idea of state legislators drawing congressional district lines and making it more of a merit-based system. When the elections are over, he told me, he would then look at 2020 and make a decision then. So I think the fact that he volunteers that much says he's seriously interested in it.
Very interesting. John, thank you so much for that update from the Hill. We hope you have a great weekend. Ellis and Michael will be sticking around with us for the full hour, so don't forget to come back after the break for more debate. Also, retired U.S. Army Major General Paul Vallely weighs in on Russia versus the U.S. We'll be right back. Are growing between Russia and the West in the wake of the nerve agent attack on British soil. Yesterday, Russia announced it will expel 60 U.S. diplomats and shut down the U.S. consulate in St. Petersburg. The move comes in retaliation to the biggest expulsion of Russian diplomats since the Cold War. The State Department, however, says there was no justification for Moscow's actions.
We don't see this as a diplomatic tit for tat. Russia is responsible for that horrific attack on the British citizen and his daughter.
State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert also scolded Russia for trying to play the victim in the situation and said the U.S. reserves the right to respond to Moscow's latest move. Joining us now to discuss this is retired U.S. Army Major General Paul Vallely. He's the chairman of Stand Up America. General, welcome.
Well, thank you. Kind of happy to be with you.
Okay, so 28 countries, including the U.S., eject more than 150 Russian spies, as the State Department called them. Then Russia fires right back with matching expulsions of their own. How bad is this situation, and is this the beginning of another Cold War?
Well, perhaps we're in a Cold War again, but of a different nature. But I think without solid evidence that Britain has not been able to provide yet, that there's a lot of suggestions that it was done by a Russian agent killing another Russian agent in Britain. But I think it's been overhyped too much. There's been too much escalation at a time when we're dealing with a lot of things in the Middle East that Trump and Putin should be meeting on and could solve if they did meet. But most of these situations where they recall ambassadors, or they recall diplomats or close consulates and so on. They usually don't last too long. Usually within a year, everything's back to somewhat normality, maybe with some different people. But I think this has been far overhyped based on the lack of evidence so far.
Very interesting. I want to get your reaction, too, to something that was said earlier today on Newsmax TV about Russia. Here's former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz.
When Russia is poisoning former Russian spies in a Western country using a weapon of mass destruction, it's very difficult not to regard Russia as an enemy and as a rogue state. And I think it really required a very aggressive response by Western states, by nations all over the world. And I'm very proud of President Trump for the step that he took to expel Russian diplomats with our allies, to send a clear message to Vladimir Putin that this thug-like Soviet behavior is unacceptable in the modern world. This is something we expected of the Cold War. And if Putin wants to coexist and cooperate in the current environment, this type of behavior is just unacceptable.
Your reaction, General, I know you said a lot of this is overhyped, but what would your reaction be to those thoughts? Is Russia an enemy of the United States?
Well, I think the constant attack against Russia since Trump was elected has caused a lot of, I would say, parting of the ways. And we've not met, as I suggested when I set up the meeting between Trump and Putin at the G20. That was to lead to a better agreement regarding the Middle East and the refugee problem in Europe. But the constant attacks against Putin and Russia just have escalated out of control, I think. And now it's time for the leaders to get together and solve some of these things. And for Britain to come up with some solid evidence that it was a Russian agent under the supervision or direct control of the Russian government that conducted this. And that's not there right now.
Yeah, all right. I want to bring in our panel on this next question. Of course, it's being reported that the president told Vladimir Putin by phone, quote, "If you want to have an arms race, we can do that, but I'll win." The comment supposedly came in the same phone call in which Trump congratulated Putin for his recent win in Russia's presidential election. I'm going to bring back in Alice Hennigan and Michael Malice to this discussion. So, Michael, if this is true, what President Trump said, does this concern you, or is tough talk what the country needs?
Well, I was born in the Soviet Union, so Putin's mentality is very familiar to me. There's no idea of magnanimity or reciprocity when you're dealing with Russian negotiations. Even if the Americans did the right thing by expelling the Russian diplomats, Putin's not going to sit there and say, well, you're being fair, so I guess I'm just going to smile and nod. There will always be a sense of escalation and hitting back twice. You know, Trump, during the campaign, very much talked about if someone hits you, you have to hit him back twice as hard. That is a Russian mindset. So I don't know where this is going to end up, but it's certainly not going to end up with Putin, who was just reelected with huge numbers, kind of taking a back seat unless he absolutely has to.
Ellis, we'll go to you. Your thoughts on this. And also, I wonder from a Democratic perspective, does the move to expel these diplomats and these strong moves against Russia go against the narrative that there was some kind of collusion?
No, it actually goes along with that narrative. What it seems interesting to me is that this is the first instance, and I'd love to hear General Valley's thoughts on this, the first instance where Donald Trump has really done anything that could in any way appear critical of Russia, right? Unique among all characters in the world, Donald Trump seems to have nothing but nice things to say about Vladimir Putin. General, do you think maybe Trump's beginning to change his views on this a little bit?
No, I don't think so. I think, Alice, that he's really wanting to meet with Putin, as was the case about a year ago when I was in Moscow and was at the foreign ministry. They truly would like to meet on a lot of these issues that are at hand. I think what Trump is doing right now, he is acting tough based on evidence supposedly that came out from Britain. But again, I think it's overhyped, and we're just creating more pressure, a more severe, different kind of Cold War, when it's really not necessary when you're talking about one Russian spy as relates to maybe other things that are going on in the Middle East of a much serious nature. So I think this detracts from it with all this hype and the escalation of the different countries. I just don't think it's necessary.
Right. Well, moving on to other things happening in the world, as you mentioned, let's move on to Syria. The president made these comments yesterday in Ohio. Let's listen.
We're knocking the hell out of ISIS. We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now. Very soon. Very soon we're coming out. We're going to have 100% of the caliphate, as they call it, sometimes referred to as land. We've taken it all back quickly. But we're going to be coming out of there real soon. Going to get back to our country, where we belong, where we want to be.
Okay, General. So an American Green Beret was killed in Syria just last night. In your view, what is going on there, and should we be pulling out? What is our commitment there to begin with if Americans don't know?
Well, again, I go back to what are the threats to American national security? What is the situation with our allies? And we know that Russia supports, Putin. There is man there, and I've recommended that Assad needs to be replaced by new leadership. But you have so many parties over there. It's so intricate. When you've got the Turks, the Kurds, you've got now the Saudis, you've got Hezbollah, you've got Iran. It's a very, very difficult situation. And it's not going to be solved by continuing to have any kind of troops engaged over there. But I feel that Trump and Putin, again, can sit down and work something out here as strong leaders could. And I think that's what we need to do. But we keep forcing them apart, and it just, to me, it exaggerates the situation tremendously rather than solving anything.
Right. Ellis, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I love the general's optimism on this, and boy, I hope you're right about it. I would point out one piece of recent history, though, is that it's a whole lot easier to get into these Middle Eastern countries than it is to get out of them. I say that after, 17 years in Afghanistan, 15 in Iraq. Syria, that's a shorter number, but I think we're all going to be having this conversation a decade or two from now. We may still be in all those places.
Right. I just want to get a comment in from a Newsmax viewer slamming the president, actually, mixing the Russia news and Syria news. He says, Trump is now trying to drum up support for pulling U.S. troops, out of Syria and letting Putin have free run to make it up to him. Trump is afraid of his boss, Putin. Michael, I'll give you the last word on this since you didn't get a chance in on this last comment. What's your reaction?
Very well stated and coherent criticism of the president.
Very interesting. Retired U.S. Army Major General Paul Vallely, thank you. Do you have any last comments on that tweet from our Newsmax viewer?
Well, Trump will continue to be strong, and he'll uphold America. America first will be strong across the globe, and we have to have confidence that he does do his homework, and he's got a good staff now, and that I think if we can pull these countries together to meet and solve some of these situations, it's going to work much better than escalation. Thank you.
All right, General, thank you so much. We'll have more with Ellis and Michael after a short break. Welcome back to Newsmax Now. Well, we've heard of books being banned at schools, but what about bestsellers lists? Well, our next guest has been on our show a few times to promote his new book, Killing the Deep State. The book debuted last week at number 10 on Nielsen Bookscan's nonfiction hardcover list. Pre-sales of the book placed it at number 6 on Amazon's bestseller list, and by sales figures alone, it should have been number 4 on the New York Times list of top 15 print hardcover bestsellers for April 1st. But it's not. Instead, the book in the number 4 spot sold hundreds of copies less than Deep State did. In fact, Killing the Deep State has sold more copies than the 11 other books on the list. And we've just learned that Deep State will not appear on the Times April 8th list as well. So joining me now to share his thoughts on all of this is the author of Killing the Deep State, Mr. Jerome Corsi. Welcome to the show, Jerome.
Great to be with you. Thank you very much.
Of course. So you said you're not surprised that the New York Times has shunned your book. Why is that?
Well, I'm not surprised because the New York Times is an ideologically hard left, increasingly hate left publication, and they don't want any book that will support President Trump, whom they detest, to be on the New York Times bestseller list, even if the book legitimately outsells most of the other books. I mean, it's completely disgraceful and dishonest. But again, the New York Times is disgraceful and dishonest these days, and that's why I'm not surprised that they treated Killing the Deep State as poorly and shabbily and dishonestly as the New York Times has.
Do you think that the audience of your book, that it really matters to them whether they treated your book fairly or not? Because do they esteem the New York Times bestseller list or their expertise on these matters, do you think?
What the New York Times knows is that the booksellers still today look to that list to give you better placement in the stores, more visibility, a little bit more attention in marketing the books. And it leads to greater opportunities for publicity or greater opportunities for interviews. So if they deny you being on the New York Times bestseller list, they're trying to have a suppression campaign to make sure that nobody reads Killing the Deep State. Even if it outsold the #1 book on the New York Times bestseller list, they'd be trying to figure out a way to prevent it from being on the list. That's how ideologically driven the New York Times has become, and how completely, vacuous, detestable have been their ratings of books. But yet they have control over a lot of the book industry, and they know it. And that's the disadvantage.
What do you think that they think is so controversial about your book?
Well, my book's obviously controversial because if you read it, what I do is I detail the evidence, it's shocking, of the coup d'etat that was being planned, and I think still ongoing, deep within the Department of Justice and the FBI. This now we know extended throughout the the Obama administration, including the chief of staff from Obama, including Senator Reid in the Senate, including John Brennan in the CIA. This is getting to be finally, and as I predict in Killing the Deep State, there will be a counterattack launched by President Trump, and these criminals are going to be brought to justice, including, I believe, Hillary and Obama, on charges ultimately of sedition and treason. That's why the New York Times doesn't want anybody reading Killing the Deep State, and they're going to suppress the book.
Right, very interesting. Well, Jerome, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. We appreciate it. Again, the book is called Killing the Deep State. You can save $30 if you go to Newsmax.com for a special limited time offer. All right, coming up, college students are planning another protest. We'll tell you where and why after the break. Welcome back. We have a caller on the line who'd like to join us. We have Charles from Texas on the line. Charles, welcome to the show.
Hello.
All right, go ahead, sir.
I'd like to make the point that Sessions' move to appoint this prosecutor is tactically brilliant because it puts him in concert with the Inspector General. And Sessions explicitly says that he's being tasked to work with the Inspector General. And that's a fantastic thing because it gives Horowitz's entire investigation teeth, which heretofore has been a toothless investigation. And this is why McCabe is now launching a GoFundMe to lawyer up. And it's not just McCabe that's in jeopardy. Comey is in jeopardy, and many other FBI and DOJ officials will fall into jeopardy as well, legal jeopardy, thanks to this new prosecutor being put in the league with Horowitz. And
Right.
It's a tactically brilliant move. And the last point I'd like to make is Sessions never explicitly denied that he would ever
Right.
appoint a second special counsel.
Right.
He just said for the time being, this is what would proceed as going forward.
Right.
And my guess is a second special counsel will be on the table once
Yeah,
Horowitz and this
thanks
prosecutor
so much,
are
Charles. We got to wrap it up there, but we really do appreciate your thoughts. And very interesting. We'll see what happens with the special counsel if there's a second one moving forward. I guess we don't know. Time will definitely tell. All right. Well, we want to move on to this story, get to it because it's very interesting. A college student on Long Island is reigniting the debate about the removal of statues of historic figures who are now deemed racist or inappropriate. A protest was held on the campus of Hofstra University on Long Island, New York, to have this statue of Thomas Jefferson removed from in front of the Student Center. The student says his is an icon of white supremacists. It was donated by a Hofstra trustee, as Jefferson was credited by an architect for influencing the look of the campus. The protest was started by a student and a Black Lives Matter activist, Jeloni Owens. In her petition, she writes, "While Jefferson's architectural designs have gone on to inspire the designs of many American universities, Jefferson's values aided in the construction of institutionalized racism and justified the subjugation of black people in the United States. Jefferson owned nearly 600 slaves in his lifetime, proudly embraced eugenics, and raped countless enslaved black women and children and forced them to deliver his biological children." All right, sticking with me here are Ellis Hennigan and Michael Malice. So the statues issue was a very hot topic not long ago, Confederate statues. Michael, I can tell you want to weigh in on this, but Ellis, let's go to you. I'd love to hear your take on this.
Sure. As a native of New Orleans, where most of that battle was just fought over the Confederate statues, it's a tough issue. And I got to tell you, I have some sympathy to people who say, you know, looking back at historical figures who did horrible things, I'm not sure that this applies to Jefferson, but maybe there are some of these people that we really should not continue to be bowing down to. Germany removed the Hitler statues, and maybe we need to look back and remove some of the worst ones. That said, there is nobody in history, no historical figure, who lives up to the moral views that we have today. None of these guys were pro-marriage equality.
Right.
So it's a little hard to apply today's standards to the old ones. But it's an interesting debate, though.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, Michael, I can tell you.
I think this is a great thing that the right should exploit. And the great villains who have fomented institutionalized racism, specifically Woodrow Wilson and FDR, who had concentration camps on American soil for racist purposes.
That's a great point.
We should absolutely be doing what we can to take down the FDR memorial and destroy his legacy, which is a great means of returning back to what we had before progressivism took their toll in this country.
So who from history values do you embrace entirely?
Hamilton.
No, he had all kinds. Where was he on marriage equality?
I don't know. Marriage equality is
Where was he on slavery?
Do you want to hear the answer, or do you want to interrupt me?
No, I mean, seriously.
Hamilton was against slavery.
Yeah, he was involved in all kind of defenses of it along the way, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't.
Yeah? So you pretty much defend him?
Correct.
Okay.
And
Julius Caesar?
I'm not defending
But you know what the most important thing, let's just be real here, the most important thing about Hamilton is that he inspired a
great
Tony
musical.
Award-winning Broadway musical.
That's
However,
one way of looking at it.
of course. However, Jeloni Owens also said this at the end of her petition. A sculpture like this, and this is what I want to talk with you about, a sculpture like this belongs in a museum or archive with appropriate context, not displayed on a college campus, especially not in front of a hub of student life. So is that a fair point? When we talk about these potentially controversial historic figures, is it something that say, okay, well, we can agree to not destroy them, but they belong in a place where there is at least context?
No, it's not a fair point, because anyone who thinks Jefferson practiced eugenics does not know what that term was. It came about.
But what about the slavery issue
It
that
came
she
out
talks
the end
about?
of the 19th century, number one. Number two is the idea that college students should be telling college administrators how the school should be run is one of the relics of the late 1960s and one of the worst relics of the 1960s. You go to school to learn, you go to school to be educated and become a better person, and you get a much better education by sitting down and shutting up than yelling at people.
Yeah, but you know, it's also very interesting to have both people wrestle with these ideas. And I got to tell you, I don't think this is an issue that lends itself to easy sloganeering, to say, oh, we got to eliminate history or we can't ever question the values of those we are venerating today. To me, reasonable people ought to have a discussion about what values are we promoting by the people we have up on those statues. And to me, that's a debate that young people and their professors should be engaged in.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much. That was a very reasonable conversation. I love it. All right. Coming up, the latest on the Orlando shooting trial and a scary warning about coffee. Our domestic roundup after the break. We'll be right back. Now it's time to take a look at some headlines from around the country in our domestic roundup. Omar Mateen's widow, Noor Salman, was found not guilty today of all charges related to the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando 2 years ago. Salman faced charges of obstructing justice and providing material support to a terrorist organization. Mateen killed 49 people and injured many others when he opened fire inside that Orlando nightclub. Police killed him shortly after. Bill Cosby attended pretrial hearings today in Pennsylvania. His first trial ended in June with a mistrial after the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict. More than 50 women have come forward to accuse the 80-year-old comedian of sexually assaulting them in a string of incidents dating back decades. Cosby has denied any criminal wrongdoing. Jury selection for the retrial starts April 2nd. And check out this video of a pilot kissing the tarmac after an emergency landing in South Florida. The Piper PA-28 had landing gear troubles, causing the front wheel of the plane's landing gear to collapse as he touched down. Luckily, the pilot and his passenger both escaped safely and without any injuries. All right, you might want to think twice before enjoying that morning cup of coffee tomorrow. A California judge has ruled that there needs to be a cancer warning on coffee. The judge ruled that a chemical that is a known carcinogen is produced during the roasting process and that coffee companies need to make consumers aware of the risk. In 2016, the Cancer Agency of the World Health Organization moved coffee off its possible carcinogen list. All right, I want to talk about this last story with Ellis and Michael. The National Coffee Association put out a statement saying cancer warning labels on coffee would be misleading. The U.S. government's own dietary guidelines state that coffee can be part of a healthy lifestyle. Okay, some studies have shown drinking coffee is linked to a decreased risk of liver cancer, endometrial cancer, colon cancer, and some skin cancer. It may be one of these cases where too much of anything is harmful. Well, this lawsuit started in California. And California has been in the headlines for a lot of reasons lately. We were just talking about the case of California and regulations with the EPA story earlier this hour. Is this a case of California going too far, Ellis?
Don't trust my views on this because I'm a coffee addict. And you know what? I think I'm probably willing to take my chances on this one. As far as I can tell, the data is still, contradictory? Yeah. Is that fair? You know
Why
what?
are they
Get
doing
back
this?
to me later on this one.
Yeah, Michael.
And here I think this is something when this could actually be very counterproductive. Everyone knows, and it's very well established, cigarettes cause cancer, right? So if you're putting this label on everything, and to have us look a cup of coffee as the equivalent of having a pack of cigarettes, that's really going to make people unable to make healthy choices for their lives, and that's a really slippery slope.
That's a really good point. And it's another question that I have about studies, right? Every news story that comes out that says a study claims this, a study claims that, people start to take it as their absolute Bible, and then they stop thinking critically or thinking for themselves,
Right.
you know?
Fair enough, but let's don't make the leap where we write science off the page.
No,
and try,
I'm definitely not writing
there
science
are
off.
people out there who want to do that,
Right.
who are anti-science today.
I'm
Why
not-
don't we do some more research on this, not less, and then figure out what's really dangerous and what's
No,
not?
that's a really good point.
And we also have a lot of data because people drink coffee. It's a very popular drink. So if there were cancer rates through the roof, this would not be hard to see.
Right, I know. The other question is about California as a state, right? Because states can introduce their own regulations. Now, let's say that this goes through and coffee that's sold in California has to be regulated in this way, has to be labeled in this way. Would that cause a domino effect and force other states to do it the same?
No, I think the crazier California gets, the better it is for the other states to look at them as both a testing ground and also what to avoid. And this is going to further this kind of partisan divide, which I think is very healthy politically in this country.
Ellis?
They've also led us to some good places. I mean, medical marijuana started out there,
Sure.
didn't it? That's working out pretty well.
And Ronald Reagan.
Not everything is good. Not everything.
Oh, bipartisan offender, the state of California, I suppose. Well, I guess the science is it's still up for debate. I don't
I'm
think.
still drinking.
You know what? Me too. Michael, are you a coffee drinker?
I'm an energy drink drinker.
Okay, just as bad. All right. Coming up, a Chicago accountant gets to live out a lifelong dream. We'll show you that after the break. A couple of stories to end your week on. An accountant got to play goalie for the Chicago Blackhawks last night, and he won the game. Check this out. Scott Foster, a 36-year-old accountant who hadn't played on a high level for more than a decade, was asked to be the team's emergency goalie due to mounting injuries. Foster has never played in the NHL, but he got his chance when the starter was injured in morning practice yesterday, and his backup left the game with cramping issues.
It's a little different when a few hours ago you're working your day job and then you're living your dream, so it's fun.
All right, I think the message there is keep dreaming, folks. You never know. I bet that was a really nice break for him as a CPA, too, during tax season. All right, then there's this. We have mentioned on this show that a rogue Chinese space station is set to crash into Earth, possibly this weekend. Happy Easter. Happy Passover. There's no indication of where the out-of-control 9-ton station will hit yet, but they say it is very unlikely. That's less than 1 in a trillion that a person will be hit. The space station will most likely break up into small pieces on re-entry. All right, we have our very expert panels on space station landings with us to weigh in on this one. Just for a little historical context, in 1997, a woman named Lottie Williams is believed to have been hit by space debris in Tulsa, Oklahoma. NASA confirmed that the timing and location of the incident were consistent with the re-entry and breakup of a second-stage Delta rocket that fell to Earth. That is about as positive as we'll get. That is what hit her. The Washington Post yesterday says we have a massive space debris problem. The European Space Agency estimates that there are now more than 170 million pieces of space debris in circulation. All right, so our space station crash landing experts are here to join us, Ellis and Michael. Where does this rank on your list of concerns, Michael?
It's clearly number one. I won $1 trillion. That's almost certain to happen.
I know.
You know,
Ellis,
I'm okay with space debris as long as I get to decide where it falls.
Right. Where would you have it fall?
Mar-a-Lago seems good.
Oh.
But that was a nice target there, don't they?
Michael,
Well,
you're
well, in his defense, they have a lot of groundskeepers there, so we clean it pretty quickly.
Sweep it up quick.
Yeah.
Is that, well, but on the topic of space debris, though, I mean, that's a huge number, 170 million pieces.
But it's not a huge number if you consider how big the Earth is, and by the time they hit re-entry, they're going to be the size of a golf ball. Yeah.
It's mostly water. You know what, by the way, I am going to bring my tennis racket to the U.S. Open this year. Just in case.
Oh, just in case. I was going to say, wait, are you pivoting to another story about the U.S. Open? I don't follow tennis. Should I know the joke here?
It's the Blackheart guy.
But, I gotcha. Are you?
Yikes.
I know.
You never know.
See, but I was getting really into the space story because this is really interesting to me.
Unlike the space station, that joke didn't land.
See,
You
this
know
is
what?
why I need my space
If you
experts.
get good jokes, the one thing you can't control is whether you have a good audience.
Yes, absolutely. You know what? I guess we will all just leave here hoping and praying that our fellow Americans do not get hit by the space debris.
No, it'll pass us over.
It will pass us over. Okay. So with that, we're going to round out our week. But I wanted to take a minute to say goodbye because this is my last time hosting Newsmax now. In April, I will be leaving the United States and relocating to Zurich, Switzerland, where I will be fortunate to expand my work in the mental health field, in particular as it relates to eating disorders, addiction, and health and well-being, a subject area I'm very passionate about and have mentioned quite a few times on this show. So if you'd like to stay updated, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram to hear more details and see pictures of mountains, because who doesn't want that? All right, I look forward to calling a new city home, but goodbye is bittersweet. Thank you to everyone here at Newsmax for making me feel so welcome. And thank you, our audience, for watching, for your enthusiasm and your spirit. It's definitely felt by us all here in the newsroom. All right, that's it for us. Happy Passover, happy Easter, enjoy a beautiful weekend. That's it for this Friday edition of Newsmax. Thanks for watching.